Welcome. I hope you are having a wonderful night, dear viewer. Tonight, I will be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. Make sure to leave your feedback on the comments so I can make this the best experience for you. And if you have any stories you would like me to tell, you can send them through the link in the description. Let's begin. Story 1. Come on, Ben, I cried merrily as I scrambled up on the flat white rocks overlooking the sparkling blue ocean. I sneaked a look back. Ben was slouched, half turned away from me, his hands deep in his pockets and his face covered by his hoodie. I resisted the urge to snap in frustration. I wonder if we'll see any seals. Won't that be fun? I felt I sounded like a schoolteacher. God, what was wrong with me? All I wanted was to have a little outing by the ocean walk with my son on this balmy spring evening, like we used to when he was younger. It was breaking my heart that he never wanted to spend any time with me. Everybody said it was natural. It's normal that teenagers pull away from their parents, act grouchy with their mom, refuse to engage, preferring instead to spend hours on their phones with their friends, completely normal and natural. I needed to stop babying him and let him figure out things himself. Yet I refused. I couldn't back off like everyone in the world wanted me to. I wanted to spend time with my son, talk to him, go out with him. Is that so crazy? Am I being so unreasonable? After spending my entire waking and sleeping hours of the past 14 years worrying about and working for my son, that I insist he get out of his stinky room for an hour and come with me to enjoy our beautiful local ocean views. We had walked these trails 100 times together, barely a few years ago. Why was he acting now as though I was dragging him to watch a public execution? Do you want to turn on the binoculars? I said, ignoring his sour glance. I knew he was fuming because I had made him leave his phone at home. Do you remember that time we saw a seal? Oh, you must have been, 9 or 10? He sighed heavily as I settled myself on the rock and brought out the binoculars. I bet I'll spot a seal before you. He mumbled something about just shut up, about the seals already, but I pretended to ignore it. The fresh ocean breeze was lifting my spirits, and I was actually quite excited at the prospect of seeing seals. The binoculars glued to my face. I scanned the vast blue expanse. I could hear Ben kicking the base of rock. Can we go now? What? I haven't seen a seal Oh, I fell silent. Through the binoculars, I saw a struggling, drowning man. Pure terror distorted his wet face. He seemed completely alone, just a little too far from the shoreline. Mom, did you see a seal? Give me a turn, Ben suddenly spoke up loudly in my ear. I brought the binoculars down. Without their aid, the drowning man was barely visible. He could have been a speck of rock or trick of the waves by the curving far shore. No, I snatched the binoculars away. Ben frowned. You said you wanted me to spot the seals, he said, and reached out again. I was determined not to let Ben see the drowning man. It was too late to help him. I was too far off. His face showed he was too close for death. I needed to protect my son from this sight. Mom, he cried familiarly. There's no seal, I snapped. But look, I think there's a crab in that tide pool. The old tricks of motherhood came easily to me as he looked back distractedly. I raised my binoculars again, in time to see the head go under for the last time. I caught his final glance, staring straight at me. Then I saw only waves. There's no crabs, Mom. I want to see seals, Ben whined. I handed him the binoculars. Here, darling, have a look, and then we must be getting back. It's getting chilly. Story 2. 4 years ago, when I was 15 years old, I had a strong passion for puzzles. However, being short on money, I embarked on a mission with my 12-year-old sister to find a toy store that sold affordable off-brand toys. Our search led us to a rather desolate area of town. where we stumbled upon a store that didn't quite resemble your typical toy store from the outside. Its shelves were filled with dusty items, appearing untouched for years. It almost seemed as if the store had lost its purpose. Nevertheless, we decided to step inside, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. Inside the store, we were greeted by a man stationed at the cash register. He seemed to notice our arrival, but I didn't sense anything particularly strange about him, or the store itself, other than the eerie emptiness. Disappointed by the absence of puzzles, I approached the man and mustered the courage to ask him about it. "Hey, I've been looking for puzzles, but I can't seem to find any. Do you know if there are any available?" I inquired. To my surprise, the man responded, "Oh yes, we have puzzles. They're downstairs." Curiosity piqued. I glanced around but failed to spot any indication of a downstairs when we entered the store. Nevertheless, determined to find my desired toy, I agreed to see these elusive puzzles. After all, this was our third store visit, and I was becoming increasingly desperate. The man walked around the counter, leading us to a door that was inconspicuous unless you knew where to look. He swung it open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. At the bottom awaited a blank wall, with no sign of toys in sight. It didn't feel right. Was there really a downstairs in this peculiar store? Shouldn't the door be open if it led to an actual area? In that moment, my stomach sank, and an overwhelming sense of danger washed over me. It was as if every instinct within me screamed, "Get out of there." The man stood there, his eyes fixed on me, waiting for my sister and me to step down in front of him. Fumbling for an excuse, I stammered. My mom is calling me. I'll be right back." Without wasting another second, my sister and I bolted out of the store, never looking back. Perhaps there were puzzles hidden away in that mysterious abyss. Or maybe there weren't. However, one thing was certain. I had no intention of sticking around to find out. Reflecting on the incident, it became glaringly apparent just how crucial it is to exercise caution in such situations. If my gut feeling was correct, and the man harbored ill intentions, a single step closer to that staircase could have had disastrous consequences. He could have easily pushed me down, leaving me with no means of escape. So, dear readers, remember to prioritize your safety. Don't venture down random stairs and always stay vigilant. Story 3. My grandfather once shared a chilling tale with me when I was just a young child. It was a story about a haunting figure that roamed the woods behind our house, lurking in the darkness of the night. This was no ordinary woman. She was a wraith, a malevolent spirit that would venture out after midnight, stealing the breath of anyone unfortunate enough to encounter her. As a child, this tale instilled a deep fear within me, ensuring that I would never dare venture near those woods after dark. And as I grew older, I began to realize that perhaps this fear was my grandfather's intention all along. According to the story, the wraith was said to be draped in a white gown, the preferred attire of the ghostly. A black scarf wrapped tightly around her head cast her face into shadow, revealing only her eerie, dog-like teeth. Young men were particularly vulnerable to this malevolent entity, and any who went missing were assumed to have fallen victim to her grasp. However, upon reflection, I could only recall one person vanishing in the 16 years I lived in my grandparents' house, and he was a known drunkard. Her cackling would chill your bones, Grandpa warned, and then you would struggle to breathe as she stole the very air from your lungs, relishing in your slow suffocation. And once you were gone, she would drag you away, either to feast upon you or to fashion her dark charms from your bones. Was she a witch? I once asked, to which he replied with a hint of exasperation. Witch, demon, ghost, call her what you will. It's all the same, my boy. She is pure evil incarnate. I pondered over the meaning of incarnate, while also recognizing that they were not all exactly the same. Yet, I kept my thoughts to myself, sensing Grandpa's annoyance with my inquisitiveness. The story was repeated on numerous occasions, each time taking on new terrors, plots, and twists, particularly when my cousins visited. At the age of 8, while my sister was 6, our cousins, all around our age or younger, would join us. If the purpose of these tales was to keep us away from the woods, it undeniably succeeded. Whenever darkness descended, I would remain as close to the house as possible, unless accompanied by an adult. Even then, I would gaze into the dark expanse of trees, my chest filled with a primal terror, finding solace in the knowledge that this demonic witch only emerged after midnight when I would be safely tucked in bed. Our house faced the main road in the front, while the back sloped down about 50 feet to a narrow valley where Grandpa tended his garden. This garden provided our daily meals with fresh produce. It spanned around 50 feet in width and 100 feet in length, extending into an upward slope of approximately 200 feet, where the thickening tree line began. The highest point reached around 250 feet before the land undulated into valleys and hills, most of which were blanketed in brush and woodland. As I grew older, this area became a favorite playground for me and my friends. We would venture into the woods to fish in the streams, gather fruits, or engage in games like gangsters. The latter was my personal favorite, dividing ourselves into two groups and hiding throughout the woods, brandishing branches as imaginary firearms, attempting to outwit and shoot the opposing team. This game hinged on the participants' honesty when shot, requiring them to acknowledge defeat. In those innocent times, most of us would concede when caught, though occasional disagreements arose regarding who had been shot first. But since this was a much more innocent time, most of us gave up when we were caught, although there was the occasional argument about who shot who first. Despite all the fun we would have in the woods, as dusk approached, we would all hustle back to our homes. I wasn't the only one whose parents or grandparents regaled them with stories of monsters and ghouls in the thicket. But as any smart person knows, those things can only exist after dark. So we were comfortable, in our youthful naivety, of making and holding firm to that distinction. If you are wondering whether some scary episode occurred that proved my grandpa right then, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but none did. Well, at least nothing happened when I was a kid. It would be many years later, long after Grandpa had died and I had grown up to have kids of my own, that this terrifying story would once again be fresh in my mind. I left my grandparents' home when I was 16, going on 17, and while I would frequently visit, there was one occasion that I found myself in the house all alone. This would have been about 20 years later. Over the decades, many of my uncles and aunts had gotten married and bought homes of their own, with a couple even migrating. By the time both of my grandparents passed away, only my Uncle John still lived in the house. John was a career bachelor, and so lived alone. Sadly, John was a heavy drinker, which led to organ failure when he was just 55. Even though I had always been particularly close to John, he had been ailing for some time, so his death did not take me by surprise, and I was with him at the hospital the night he died. Now, my family and I lived about a 2.5-hour drive from the area where John lived. Meantime, Grandpa's house, or John's house now, was just a 15-minute drive away from the hospital. By the time I wrapped up at the hospital and the attendants had taken away John's body, it was already around Onium, and after chatting with my wife on the phone, she suggested I just sleep over at the house, and she and the kids would drive down tomorrow. I agreed and arrived at the house around 1:30 a.m. Everything was in pitch darkness, and as I locked my car and walked from the driveway to the front door, I was suddenly transported 30 years back in time, and I felt that childish fear reach out with cold fingers. Grabbing onto my stomach and caressing my back, I involuntarily shivered, but then laughed a bit, and was quickly an adult with a job and 2 great kids once more. I opened the door, flipped on the lights, and headed for the back bedroom, which was the one I used to sleep in as a kid. There were 4 bedrooms in all. I hit a bed and was out like the proverbial light. Less than half an hour later, I shot up in bed, not sure what had awoken me. I knew how much time had passed since the first thing I did was glance at the clock. 1. 50. Knitting the green lead readout informed me. Damn it, I thought to myself. You're much too old to be acting like a kid, Mark, I told myself, figuring it was just the stress of John's death and tiredness that was getting the best of me. I lay down and made myself comfortable before once more closing my eyes. And that's when I heard it. It was a moan, actually. It was more like a wail. It was a woman's voice. And although it seemed low and mournful, I heard it clearly. My eyes flew wide open, and I felt the hairs on my body stand on end. The sound was coming from the back of the house. "The hell is that?" I whispered. And the child in me said, "I'm staying right where I am." None of this bullshit for me, and I wish to God that I had heeded my own advice. But I was an adult after all, not some gullible kid, and as the moaning continued, every couple of minutes or so, it seemed to draw ever closer. My rational mind started playing out different, more realistic scenarios in my head. I had neighbors, people who lived on either side of the house, and I know that at least one of those families had an elderly woman living with them. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the lady suffered from dementia and all the problems that went with that. As this thought developed in my mind, so did my confidence, and I genuinely started wondering if maybe this was in fact that old lady who, in her mental state, may have walked out of the house while her family slept. It was late after all. Okay, I resolved that I at least needed to take a look, and if, as unlikely as it might be, it was in fact old Miss Jenny from next door, only then would I go out and fetch her. So I slipped out of bed and snuck over to the window, trying to be as quiet as I could. The windows in the house must have been decades old themselves, and were still made of glass louvers. A thick curtain covered the window, for which I was grateful since no one could see me from the outside, even though I was on the second floor. I did not switch on any lights. Very slowly, I pushed aside just a tiny bit of the curtain to the left of the window and peeked outside. It was sheer darkness, with only a faint glimmer from the streetlights casting any illumination. My eyes did not take long to adjust to the darkness since I had been sleeping in a dark room just moments before, and soon I could start making out things. My Uncle John did not share Grandpa's passion for gardening, and I could see that where there were neatly laid out vegetable beds and trees before, there was now a heavy undergrowth, creeping up to within 10 feet of the back of the house. "Oh wow, John. If Grandpa saw this, he'd have your head," I thought, and smiled a bit. Then I heard it and my smile dissipated. It sounded like it was coming from inside the brush not too far in front of the window, but I strained to make out anything in the dark. "If that's you, Miss Jenny, then you are going to be in a world of hurt," I whispered, as I imagined the thorns and sharp branches that made up that overgrowth, but barely had the words left my lips. I was sure I saw movement. Wait, yes, there was something, someone, in there. Oh shit. If this was that old lady, she could be hurt, and I stood up and pulled the curtain open wide enough that someone looking up would know that someone was looking down, and that was when she stepped out of the undergrowth. It was not Miss Jenny. I felt my throat constrict and my breathing grow ragged. Perspiration instantly burst from my face. There was an icy, tingling feeling in my stomach. I was sure my bladder malfunctioned, and I remember having the most absurd thought. So people's knees really do knock like in the cartoons after all. As all strength left my legs, causing them to bump together. It was a woman, but a woman clad in gown which may have been white at one time, but which was now smeared with dirt, and I hesitate to imagine what else. I could not see her face. She was staring at the ground, and a black cloth was wrapped around her head. That was when the moaning stopped, and the cackling began, just as Grandpa had told me all those years ago. It sounded like not one, but a chorus of women, deep and scornful, and as she laughed, slowly the apparition, the demon, the witch, whatever the hell this was, started to raise its head to look at me. I could not move. I wanted to yank back the curtain and dash under my bed. I wanted to turn on all the lights in my house. I wanted to make a run for the car and get the hell out of there. I wanted to do all those things. but I did nothing. Transfixed. I stood watching as her head rose slowly but deliberately, and then it was looking at me. I knew it. I felt it in every sinew, every nerve, and every fiber of my being. But I could not see her face. It was hidden by the black scarf, which was wound in a hood over her face. There was just darkness, and I was left to wonder what manner of malevolence was staring at me. And then it smiled. That smile broke my paralysis. That smile stood out from the darkness of where the face should be. White, canine teeth, and suddenly the cackling was replaced by laughter, a piercing, evil sound. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I could not look away. Terror overwhelmed me as I suddenly realized I could not breathe. I gasped for air and with both hands grasped at my throat, which might very well have saved my life. As I reached for my throat, I let go of the curtain, causing it to fall back into place, covering the window, hiding the devilish creature that stood just below my window. But I could still hear its sinister laughter, and still I could not breathe. Stars swam before my eyes until at last, I think I passed out. I sat up in a rush, sending myself tumbling off the bed and knocking my head. My chest hurt, and my eyes stung as if I had been crying. I looked around in terror, but all that greeted me was bright sunlight, shining through tiny slits in the curtain, covering the windows, and the melodic singing of the finches that were popular in this area. I rubbed it where I hit my head, all the terror from earlier, suddenly punching me in the gut, and I took a deep breath. I could breathe. I gave a small nervous laugh. I had been on the bed when I awoke, and all else seemed normal. Did I dream all that? I must have, I thought, as I warily glanced across at the window, which was still closed and covered by the curtain. I slowly stood up. I felt dizzy, and hoped that I had not given myself a concussion, and gingerly made my way across to the window. I hesitated, but the daylight and the sounds of birds and chirping of other insects comforted me a bit, and I yanked the curtain wide open. All was normal. It was a beautiful day. The sunlight flooded the back of the house, and I saw birds and butterflies dancing and fluttering among the greenery of the trees. The sky above was bright blue, with puffy clouds being carried along by the wind, and I fondly remembered why I had loved this place so much when I was a child. The garden was indeed overgrown, but that was to be expected, and I had just about convinced myself that I did indeed have a terrible nightmare when I saw them. My blood ran cold. There, in the soft earth beneath my window, were footprints, leading from the bushes and ending just where I had seen that nightmare creature. But these were no ordinary footprints. No, these were no ordinary footprints. No, these looked like they were made by extremely large hooves.